We could think of no other speaker that we could bring to you tonight that more clearly and energetically epitomises a dare to live approach to life. Farmer, father, adventurer and author Peter Bland. Peter is the first Australian to have adventured to both the North and the South magnetic poles. What makes Peter's accomplishment even more remarkable is that he completed his expedition to the North magnetic pole 12 months after undergoing his second bout of major heart surgery. Using the experiences of his trips to the wilderness, Peter has raised more than 14 million Aussie dollars for Australian charities, has produced 2 TV documentaries, and his biography, A Step Too Far, was just released by Pan Macmillan. If the testimonies on his biography by the likes of Betty Cuthbert, Stuart Diver, Peter Hillary and Greg Norman are anything to go by, then this is indeed a man who has dared to live. Greg Norman said, "What Bland achieved without achieving his goal just reeks of what makes great men. Determination, resiliency, total belief in themselves, sacrifice, stubbornness, inordinate amount of courage and trust in their partner and teammates. Your dreams are the blueprint to reality." Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Peter Bland.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, yo!
Thank you for that wonderful welcome. Gary and Jan, thank you very much for that wonderful, wonderful, fabulous introduction. I wrote it and you read it, and I appreciate that. Dare to live. We are the same. Why? Because we have dared to live. I am sure you, like you will learn of me tonight, have had your highs, you've had your lows. You've started at Club 3, and you've gone to Presidential. You've gone the premier levels in between. I've had my ups and my downs also. And we're here to talk about that. We're here to talk about a thing called luck, because I'm a lucky guy. That's from a guy who 2 years ago was lying at the bottom of an icy crevasse in Antarctica, being taken by an avalanche, dragged 50 metres down the mountain and thrown 40 metres vertically down onto a hardened ice plate. I fell 14 stories. I broke bones in my feet, leg, crushed pelvis, suspected broken back. Every rib in my left-hand side was broken, fractured skull, bleeding from the nose, ear and mouth. Severe brain damage. Most of that was the assessment of my partner, Jay Watson. Jay went to school with me, so he already knew about the brain damage. For the next 3 days, Jay lay on me to give me his body temperature so I didn't die of hypothermia. So I've got my fingers and my good looks. I've got my nose, I've got my toes. At least that was his excuse. I'm not too sure about the hand-holding last weekend. The reason we are the same is because we have dared to live. We have dreamed. We have dreamed, and that's where it all starts with. But what happens is the average punter out there dreams, but they do very little about it. The secret ingredient, I think, is time, because once you've added time to that, it's going to be done by a time. It's one thing to dream it, but it's another thing to say, I'm going to put a timeline to it. So now it's a goal. So that's okay. But how do you turn it to success? Well, it's very complicated, and I'm sure you've never heard this before. Preparation and opportunity. If you put preparation and opportunity together towards your goal, you will achieve it. And you will be described as lucky. And if there's one thing that jacks me, is if somebody describes me as lucky. I bet you get the same thing. once you've achieved the levels that you've achieved, executive and above, to be here tonight, and people say, look at them, they've got flexibility of time, they've got flexibility of income, they've got all the time at home with their wife and children, or husband and children. But you know, and I know, that you've worked so hard to get there, and you've grabbed opportunities. So what I'm here to talk about tonight is opportunities. The preparation is easy enough. I mean, it's hard work, sure. But what I find is so hard is recognizing opportunities. They're such slippery little suckers. They can be right in front of your face all your life. They can be the hug from your 1-year-old son, praise from your father, an opportunity offered to you by a friend, and let it go past you. It just goes straight past you. You don't grab it with both hands. Well, believe me, my friends, if you've been to where I've been, you grab opportunities with not one hand, you give them a bear hug. You grab them. I'm a lucky guy. I was born with a hole in my heart when I was 0. My brother was kind enough to do what big brothers do. He threw me down the steps of a friend's holiday home. Mum and Dad thought I broke a few ribs, but I hadn't. But they said there's something a bit funny about his ticker. We better check it out. Indeed, I had a hole in my heart. That was 1972, so it's pretty early days for heart surgery in Australia. So we had to wait. We had to wait 4 more years. In that time, Mum and Dad were determined that I wasn't in any way labelled disabled or wrapped up in cotton wool, so I used to be puffing behind my eldest brothers and sisters up and down the hills. Well, when they fixed me up 4 years later on, I took off like a rocket and I didn't look back. I went back to playing football, and I loved my football. But I hated going to football training, and the reason I hated going to football training because I had a great big scar on the front of my chest. And boy, I used to do everything possible to make sure that I was in the shirts on team and not in the shirts off team. I used to cover my chest like this with my thumb, put it across here, and the coach pulled me aside and he said, Bland, if I see you covering the scar with your hand, I'm going to say it every single time you do it in front of everybody else. Bland, take the hand away from your scar, your chest, to cover your scar. I'm not sure about the psychology behind that, but it worked and I did it. I went to university, which is a 40-minute presentation in itself. Rather prolonged it was. But after a few years, it was completed. And I had a goal, I had a dream. I wanted to be wool classing, I wanted to be involved in the wool industry around the world. I went across and I got a job as a rouseabout, sort of a dog's body, on a station in Argentina called Estancia El Condor. I got on a plane to fly over there to Estancia El Condor, the largest sheep station in the world. And I was running up and down the aisle after 10 weeks of continuing adult education, which gives you an idea of how long it took me to do university, with Spanish. And I was running up and down there using the only words that I knew, which is Yo soy de Seville, which means I am from Seville, which I wasn't, so it wasn't that helpful. I had a year in South America, and when you get chucked in the deep end, you learn to speak the language of where you are. I was teaching English up on the coast of Ecuador, up on the west coast. Well, they don't have any other coast. And I was teaching English there to a fellow there in return for his surfboard. I met an Austrian guy in the hut beside me, and he'd just crossed the Atlantic on a yacht. And I said, that's for me. Next year, I'm going to skipper a yacht across the Atlantic. That's from a guy who had, to this point, sailed nothing but windsurfers and nothing bigger than that. But that was my dream. So I came back here to mainland Australia. I enrolled in night school in celestial navigation, coastal navigation, seamanship at the local TAFE. And I went down to the local yacht club with a sign saying crew wanting position. So I waited all day in my daggy tennis shorts and shoes, and finally, begrudgingly, a skipper of a little 20-foot yacht said, "Righto, you better come with me." So I went out with him. I sailed with him for a few weeks, and finally learned which of the ropes he was pointing at in increasingly high volume. And I said to him, how do you get onto those big ones? And he said, you stick with me for a while and I'll get you on some big ones. Well, he did. And then I ended up doing all the big offshore races around Australia. I applied for a job I saw advertised at the college where I was doing the study. It said skipper wanted for Atlantic Crossing. So I applied and he accepted. I wasn't that experienced at that stage. My father, who was a county court judge, thought there was either sex or drugs involved. There wasn't the latter. At any rate, I had to find a way of justifying my existence, so I started a shortbread company. And the shortbread company was called Settlers Shortbread. And it was my dream to take this Settlers Shortbread from a backyard operation on the farm, which I was marketing in the very rustic approach. And I set a goal to take that to the export market to Japan. So I applied many times to get my product promoted in Japan, but I wasn't successful. Now, my factory was not that fancy. It was a washing machine at the farm. It was quite complicated. What you do is you take the agitator out, put a laundry bucket in there instead, then get the agitator and cut it down with a relatively blunt hacksaw, put it back in, just add flour, sugar, and butter, and put it on, I find normally on normal cycle. And out comes perfect Settlers Shortbread dough. So meanwhile, I've landed Myers, David Jones, Myers, Daimaru, Hilton Hotel, Intercontinental, Crown Casino. I was in the big places, but I wasn't in Japan. So I reapplied to JETRO, Japanese External Trade Organisation. Well, finally, I was one of 10 Victorian companies shortlisted. So I was called into the office in Collins Street in Melbourne, and they said, yes, Mr. Bland, you've been shortlisted. Just a small matter. We'll come and the inspector will come and see your factory, and that's all okay. Then we'll start to export. Set you up over at Tokyo Food Ex, the largest food expo in the world. So small problem. I left that meeting. Of course, my sister says I've got more front than Myers. I said, oh, no problem, no problem. Thank you. Left, went out, got a Yellow Pages, looked at Yellow Pages, and I looked up cookie factories. I found one in Flemington Road, Melbourne. It's called Pace Biscuits. I went into Pace Biscuits. I said, Leo Pace. Hello, Peter Bland. Good to meet you. Can we pretend that this is my factory? With a small promise that if I get the export orders, I will, of course, produce them in your wonderful facility. He agreed to that with some convincing. So at any rate, 2 weeks pass. It's, of course, the time now for Mr. Takeda to come from Tokyo for the inspection. He comes to the factory. I walk out there, bold as brass. I said, hajimemashite, which means nice to meet you. He then started going on in Japanese, assuming that I was quite fluent, and I said, whoa, no, that's it. I've used up my quota. We did a tour of the factory, and he took great interest in this mixing bowl, which is somewhat better than my Premier washing machine. He came over towards this thing, and I was encouraging him not, because I didn't know the guy that was operating it. I didn't want him to ask me too many questions, but he said, oh, what do machine? I say, oh, it's a mixer. It's a mixer. This is a good one. And I went up and he kept on coming, and the guy that was mixing it was looking at me, and I didn't want him to say anything like, can I help you? So I slapped him on the back and said, good job, Joe, good job. And I grabbed Mr. Takeda and off we went. Well, finally, he said, no problem, we're very impressed, and they supported me to go to Tokyo. I was flown to Tokyo, all set up, stall, the whole thing. My goal was achieved. We went over there, had some potential buyers. The only small problem was, at the same time, I'd agreed to sail a yacht back from Osaka after the Melbourne-Osaka yacht race. So I'm not sure that they thought my Australian working hours were that good, because my working hours were sort of 9 a.m. to 15 knots. At any rate, we got the orders and came back here to Australia. And then I got a thing which I hadn't had before, a reputation. I've had the bad ones. This was a good one. I actually got quite a good reputation as a yacht skipper. And so I was then invited to take a team to the South Magnetic Pole. And that's an opportunity that brings me here tonight. We were 10 days out of Hobart. We'd entered the pack ice zone, which is the area where the salt water, which has a lower freezing temperature than fresh water, was freezing on impact. It was freezing on the deck, on the mast, on the ropes, on everything. We had about 2.5 tons of ice on deck. So we were constantly chipping the ice off the deck and off the mast. Well, at any rate, my only claim on this one is this is a caveat that I'm giving you before I tell you the story. I was asleep. I was in my bunk, enjoying a moment of rest, and I woke up to a bang, almighty bang. And I assumed that we'd hit an iceberg, which meant the whole game was over. You're talking about icebergs the size of Belgium. We hadn't hit an iceberg. What had happened is a very unusual thing had happened. The wind had died down, which is very unusual in the Southern Ocean. The wind had died down, but we needed propulsion. So we engaged the engine in gear without checking that all the ropes were inboard. Not such good preparation there. At any rate, the starboard sheet, the rope on the right-hand side, was wrapped around the propeller, and there was no more motor, no more propeller, and there was Antarctica, the size of Australia and Europe put together, with a katabatic wind, which is the cooling wind coming off this massive continent towards a little 60-foot yacht with 10 people on board. 3 days we tried to get ashore, but we were not going to get there. Pretty serious climbers on board, 3 of whom had just climbed Mount Everest, including a friend of mine, David Hempelman Adams, the only guy in the world to have climbed the 7 summits and to walk to the 4 poles. Pretty serious climbers with agendas on the speaking circuit back in Europe. And after 3 days of minus 30 ambient temperature, add wind chill makes it minus 60, they had better places to be than flogging around in Commonwealth Bay, Antarctica. I had my own agenda. On the conversation on the way down in the middle of the night, I'd been talking to David about future trips and so forth. He was talking about a North Magnetic Pole trip, and we got talking about it, and I thought, well, I could be the first Australian if I did that. We got talking about it. Well, now this crisis happened. It was a bad thing, yeah, but it was my opportunity. I consulted with Ollie, the ship's doctor. I said, Ollie, how long would you give me if I dived over the side to cut the rope free? There was no wetsuit on board. Again, not such good preparation. He said 5 minutes. So they took me down below and stripped me down, preparing me to go over the side. Strapped the knife to my hand because you won't be able to open and close your hand. I said to David, just hold on 1 second. And here's the small tip about negotiation. It's about timing. I said, David, I want 3 things. He said, mate, you do this, you can have whatever you want. I said, I want it filmed, hence the footage. I want the international film rights to the footage, hence the documentary. And thirdly, I want to be navigator on an Anglo-Australian expedition to the North Magnetic Pole. He said, Pete, you do this, you can have whatever you want. So we just went for it. They put me down there. As I said before, put the knife around my hand, put me to the edge, and then put me over the edge.
Remember, we've got you attached to the deck, so you come up on those lines. Oh, pull yourself down on those lines, so you can always pull yourself back up on them.
Yeah, okay.
Don't get tangled with the line. Don't go cutting the safety line off.
It was cold. It was very cold. It was like the worst ice cream headache you've ever had. I went down, and all I knew was cut the rope, cut the rope, cut the rope. I went down there, and I couldn't cut the rope. It was thick, 16 mil Spectra, really thick, strong rope. It wasn't going to cut. So I came back up to the surface, about 12 feet, back up to the surface, and I said, and I said, quick, Pete, what do you want? What do you want? I said, what do you want? I said, more slack, give me more slack. And so Roy on the bow gave me 4 feet more slack. Gave me more slack. I took a breath, I went down, and I unraveled it rather than cutting it. I knew I was getting close to 5 minutes. I quickly went up, mini breath, went down, got the last little bit off because I knew it wasn't much point in getting it 90% off. I mean, that's like being half pregnant. It's either off or it's not. So I got it off. I came up thumbs up. And there was a fringe benefit for having got that rope off, which apart from seeing my great hero, Sir Douglas Mawson's hut, there it was, less than a mile away. And we stepped foot the next day, and it was all the better for the adversity that we've gone through. But for me, it was all the better for what I'd gone through, because you know the treatment for hypothermia. And they weren't all males on board. They rubbed down, and also they loaned me their gear because all my gear was wet, some of which I haven't returned yet. We got there, and whilst I was physically there, mentally I was dreaming. Mentally, Peter Bland was the first Australian to the North Magnetic Pole. There I was, I could see it in my mind. I was waving the flag. Came back here to mainland Australia. I asked the girl of my dreams to marry me, to which she said, "Are you serious?" Which is a fair enough response. I mean, I'd been professionally sailing yachts around the world for 7 years and doing my promotions of settlers shortbread. I'd shown no inclination of settling down. She took some persuasion, which included some gigantic promise for a engagement ring, which I'm still trying to pay off. I'm looking for two things out of that promise. One, the person that told my wife that one should always have an engagement ring that represents the income that you will have. And secondly, that income. We flew over to England, where we bought this recently spoken about engagement ring. We met up with David, we went climbing in Wales, and I met the other team members. David started to teach me how to put sponsorship proposals together and how to get money out of the corporates to support your dreams. I came back here again, and I thought, life does not get much better than this. I was pulling a tyre up and down Albert Park Beach, up and down the beach, building up the legs, building the strength of my legs for the snow next year. I'm going up and down the beach, and the next thing you know, bang, I'm on a trolley going into intensive care, Royal Melbourne Hospital. What happened? How do you go from fit as a fiddle, the girl of your dreams says, "Yes, I'll marry you," and now you're on a trolley going into intensive care, Royal Melbourne Hospital? What happened? What happened is I collapsed on the beach with an aneurysm, a thoracic aneurysm. Actually, the reason I collapsed was because of chronic pneumonia. My left lung had collapsed. This aneurysm, which is a dilation of your aorta, had grown so large, it had grown to 3 times diameter. They say it's critical when it's 2 times diameter. Well, mine was 3 times diameter. It was like having a time bomb in your chest. It was like a mini football, squeezed the air out of my left lung, hence I collapsed, starved of oxygen. Rushed into hospital, they found out what it was, went and saw a specialist, and I'll never forget that day. 10th of February 1997, in front of the surgeon with my mother and my fiancée. And he says, "What's a young man doing with a thing like this?" And I said, "Okay, doc, I got it. Can you fix it tomorrow or can you leave it for 6 months?" And he said, "No, but why?" And I said, "Oh, sorry, I should have explained. I'm going to be the first Australian to the North Magnetic Pole. Here's a mock-up of my brochure. I'm leaving in March, so I'd really appreciate it if you could just, as a favour, just knock that surgery over." And he sat me down and he said, "Peter, I don't know if you know about the risk of paralysis and the mortality rate with this operation, but you're not going anywhere." Well, where I went was back to the farm with Mum, with Jules, my wife Jules, and I was depressed. I can tell you that after spending a year writing this book with a writer, I was depressed. It's a bit like Richard Gere in Pretty Woman. I was angry. Didn't cost me $30,000 though. I was depressed. But my wife, who is so much smarter than me, which is not a challenge, says, "Baby, I know what's hurting you." And it wasn't the surgery, because no surgery was going to beat me. I was a tough kid. Hey, I'd been there. I'd been scarred. I'd bounced back. No surgeon was beating me. What was killing me was that some unnamed surgeon had taken away my dream. He just grabbed it and he's run away with it, and he didn't ask permission from me. I was angry. I was very angry. But my wife, my darling wife, was so smart that she gave me what I needed. And I say my wife's name, and Jay and Justy and my friends, because you are only as good as the people you have around you. It's fine for me to say goals and opportunities and preparation, but unless you've got fantastic people around you, it's not going to happen. Well, I am so fortunate to have fantastic people around me that have picked me up and dragged me through, and my wife is just but one of them. And she said, "Baby, you're not going to do it." You know that with your business, don't you? I mean, you are only as good as the people in your upline, your downline. Well, my wife said to me, "Baby, you're not going to do it, accept it." Boy, is that the toughest thing to take, accept it. You're not going to do it this year. You're going to do it next. It's going to be bigger and better than it ever would have been. And we're going to have a website, and you're going to have a video, and you're going to motivate children around this country, and one day you'll write a book, and we're going to raise millions of dollars for the national charity. And boy, did I grab that opportunity. I grabbed that with both hands. And I went into that operation. It was nothing. For me, it was just bring it on, baby, bring it on.
There are only two components that he was thinking about. Do the surgery, do the trip. And as he was wheeled through on his trolley to theatre, he said, "You know, I'll see you when I come out and I'll be on top of the world." And I thought, my God, he's so focused, almost to the point of obsession, on the North Magnetic Pole trip.
I think my wife is being a bit kind to me there, almost to the point of obsession. I was very obsessed. For instance, the morning after the surgery, my friend Justy was in there with me. The nurses came around. The nurses said, "Well, actually, you're going quite well. We can take some of those tubes out right now." And I said, "Actually, would you mind not taking those tubes out right now?" They thought, odd, but why? And I said, oh, nothing. Would you just mind just do your rounds and take them out later on? I said, okay. So they did. I quickly said to the nurse, quick, bring me a phone. Got me the phone. I rang my wife. I said, "Jules, quick, get over here. But bring a camera and bring a video camera with me. Because it's no longer going to be pole to pole. It's going to be table to the top, operating table to the top of the world." And I went into that just straight through it. And she got the footage. It's in the documentary. And many a friend tells me it's lucky I've got that footage. But you and I know you create your own luck. So we went along to see the National Heart Foundation. And my wife said, "Hello, this is my fiancé. Pete, he's just had major open heart surgery, his second bout, and he's going to walk the North Magnetic Pole in 12 months' time, and he's going to raise lots and lots of money for you." And they said, "No, he's not. He's an extremist. He's going to make fat people run marathons. We're going to die, and we're going to be liable." And I said, "I am not an extremist. I'm a person who takes on extreme challenges, but through research and preparation, I never exceed my parameters of competence." It's not true, but they bought that line and they made me the first... They made me the first Aussie heart hero, which is a term they just made up. And I went round and I started this game of public speaking, motivating 12-year-olds, which isn't that hard. It just involves sweets, chupa-chups and so forth. It's a good starting point. You know, Warren Buffett, the world's best investor, apart from myself. He says he's often questioned about his great relationship with Charlie, his partner, and he's questioned with that. And they say, "Warren, can you tell us what is the secret to your long relationship with Charlie to be the best share trader in the world?" And he says, "Well, it's very simple. It's very much like a good marriage, good partnership. One principle, very simple principle. Very low expectations." So I started out on the game of public speaking with 12-year-olds and moved to being here tonight. In that process, on that route, and I know I'm up here talking about preparation, but I've given you 2 or 3 examples so far where I really haven't done a good job. Well, here's another one. Settler's Shortbread was Pete Bland. I was Settler's Shortbread. I was the cookie man. I was the fixing the mixer machine, and I was the salesman. Well, when Pete Bland has major open heart surgery and I can't do anything for 3 or 4 months, no more Settlers shortbread. So Mr. Takita-san was not that happy with me in Tokyo. At any rate, Settlers shortbread didn't exist, so I had to get this thing which for 28 years I had avoided. 28 years I've got away with this. I had to get, you may have had one of these things, a job. Awful. I had a person that I had to report to and tell me what to do. And, you know, when I went into the job interview and I said, thank you very much. I was with Elders. I was a commodity trader with Elders. And they were kind enough to offer me the job. And I said, thank you very much for that. Just a small matter. I'm sure it's no big deal. I'm getting married in 2 weeks' time, so of course I'll need 2 weeks off. And I'll need 3 months off in 2 months' time because I'm going to the North Magnetic Pole. At any rate, they begrudgingly agreed, and off I went. I emailed my friend David over in the UK, and I said, I'm back, I've got a job, I'm raising money, and I'm getting fit. And he sent me this slide, which I put on my screensaver, I put it on the visor on the car, I put it on the fridge. I visualized the North Magnetic Pole. And he sent me this photo from expeditions he'd done before, with a very simple message, which I spouted wherever I went. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. And David sent me that, and I put it everywhere, and I visualized it like crazy. I was so busy raising money for these things, and you may have had similar experiences. It's actually harder raising the money you need to pay for your dreams than it often is in actually, you know, pulling the tire up and down the beach. Well, I made many a promise en route to the North Magnetic Pole. One of which was to a friend of mine who had a clothing company, and I said, Mitchie, just a bit of money, you give me some money, I get to the pole and I'll shoot an ad for you. That's fine, except for the fact that he was a boxer short manufacturer. We're on the eve of getting to the pole, and I had to do it.
Right, back about 2 inch. Bit more. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
2,000 kilometres sailing to the South Magnetic Pole. 600 kilometres walking to the North Magnetic Pole. Mitch Dowd boxer shorts. Nothing should hold you back.
Well, I got back in the tent. I don't know what was worse, being out there with the cameraman or being back in the tent, because we were going to get there. Tomorrow is pole day. We're going to get there. 5 guys on the ice for a month, hauling sled 700 kilometres across the Arctic Ocean. We're going to get there. Therefore, we can afford to put our emergency fuel in one tent, because we're going to get there. So we put the emergency fuel in one tent to heat it up so that I could strip off and not get frostbite and go out and shoot this ad. But the trouble with heating the tent up is you bring the temperature past zero. The fortunate thing, you may already know this about zero, but it's a freezing temperature. And smell does not come out of smelly socks beneath zero. But when you bring the temperature above zero, it stinks. And I honestly went back out again and took up the cameraman's offer to shoot the thing again. He actually wanted me to, because apparently I was trying to be smart and do a Benny Hill out of the camera shot, but I actually ran right out of the shot. We got to the pole the next day, and what a day it was for me and for all of us. It was fantastic. We had dreamed. I started my dream 2 years before, and I have said, I'm going to be the first Australian to the North Magnetic Pole, and that was my goal. But you and I know that things didn't go to plan. There were opportunities there. There was an opportunity to be an ambassador for the Heart Foundation and to raise money for them. There was an ambassador to motivate children around this country and an opportunity to be here tonight. But I needed friends. I needed great people around me to bring me here tonight. I did there at the pole, waving Sir Douglas Mawson's flag. Sir Douglas Mawson was the first Australian to the South Magnetic Pole in 1908, and Peter Bland had just become the first Australian to the North Magnetic Pole. In 1998. And my mind moved forward to do what it always does, to set the next challenge, to dream of the next challenge. And that was to cross the Antarctic Peninsula. The Antarctic Peninsula is essentially the Andean mountain range which divides Chile and Argentina, which goes under the Southern Ocean. Then it popped up again, which begins the mountain range which leads all the way to the pole in Antarctica. Well, Jay and I, my partner of many trips, planned to cross it to 6,000 feet and then to descend to the other side, to our pickup point at Sharket Bay. Well, that's where we started tonight's story, lying at the bottom of a crevasse, 14 stories down. Jay and I were going to get there. We were going to get there. But I didn't get there. What happened is, I remember scaling down the ice cliffs with my partner. I'm belaying him with run rope. He puts a screw in, I come down, we take the screw out. And down we went. We made camp that night. We dug the tent in under a rock ledge, which is always common sense for mountaineers. When you're descending or ascending a mountain range, always dig it in. Just remember that tip for next time you're doing it. In case there's an avalanche or a rubble fall, so it doesn't take out you and your tent. So let's say the tent site's here. We dig the tent in, make it level so you have a good sleep under a ledge. Woke up the next morning, it was blowing about 60 knots. 60 knots is 100 kilometres an hour. It's windy. It's windy that the tent was buffeting against you. You'd been lying there overnight, and so your friend's saliva is frozen on the ceiling. It's now falling on you. I was just looking for excuses to get out. I said to Jay, it's not safe to walk today. We're going to get there. It's only 12 kilometres away. We're going to get there. Let's not do it. Let's not walk today. I'll step out of the tent and I'll get the provisions. I'll strengthen the guard ropes of the tent also. So I stepped out of the tent. I stepped out of the protection of the ice ledge. I walked 15 feet over here to the sleds. I started unpacking the sleds to get the lunch, and my friends, that's where my story ends from personal memory. After that, I've got a thing called PTA. I always forget what the last part of that acronym stands for, post-traumatic amnesia. At any rate, I looked up, I remember this, I remember seeing the mountain collapse, this almighty rumble, and I scrambled to get back to the tent, to get back to the protection, to get back to my mate, but I wasn't going to get there. I didn't get there. I was dragged on the mountain, and I was thrown to the bottom, where I lay for 3 days. To go from there to being here tonight and talking to you was a journey. It was a journey, and I was a mess.
The fall he took was just a phenomenal fall, and the impact must have been incredible for him to be even alive. I think is a test of his strength and spirit.
There's my beautiful wife and daughter Olivia. I didn't know their names. I mean, I'm not good with names at the best of times, but I didn't know their names. Yeah, I had a big knock on the head, and I had to come to grips with that. I remember being treated I was treated at the military hospital in Chile, Argentina, New Zealand, to a trauma ward in the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne, a few weeks in there. I remember the CEO from the organisation coming in to see me. I said, "Boss, I'm a bit sick, but I'll see you on Friday." It was actually 6 months until I worked again. That was a long road. You would have already picked it up tonight. I spent 1.5 years seeing speech therapists to learn how to talk again. to remember names. For instance, the memory techniques that I've learned in that process. For instance, they took away my license. No secret there, they looked at my demerit points. They took away my license because of the knock on the head. But that's okay, that's an opportunity, isn't it? I mean, you can't drive, so you can take the train. So I took the train and I used the Walkman. And I listened to all these memory tapes. And I got to say, it's a phenomenal system. You should buy it. I mean, for instance, I had 5 minutes. I only just arrived here. My plane was late. I had 5 minutes, and I quickly just scanned down the 2,000 names of those people here tonight. And I can see John. I can see Michelle, Michael, Bob. How you going? No, it does work. It does work. It really does work. It's all this visualization. Visualization. So every Elizabeth I ever meet is a lizard lying in a bath, and I do this visualization. So later on, when you introduce yourself, you just watch my eyes. I'll probably be putting a lizard on your toupee or something like that. But how do you go from there to here, to being from a kid with a scar on his chest that is so proud of who he is and what he's become, that when his baby son Angus is born and on day 3 is diagnosed with having a need to have open heart surgery also, I only had one question for the surgeon. I said, will he be scarred? I said, can you go up through the femoral artery? Can you go somewhere else? And they said, no, we can't. I said, okay, it's okay, bring it on, bring it on. We have surrounded ourselves with the best people around us, and that's all you can do. All you can do is dream, set a timeline to it, be prepared to do the yards and to grab those opportunities, and surround yourself with great people. I take my hat off to you, those who have shared the dream with me, to have dared to live, to go from a scared, shy kid scarred at Club 3, Club 12, Premier, Ambassador, and Presidential. I take my hat off to you. Thank you very much for your time.